right. So official welcome back to all of our friendly chatters. For the past 42 minutes, this group has been enjoying some cozy, lively conversations in small groups, and that's what we do here at the Your Way workshops. So to all of you who are watching in the replay, I hope you will come back next time. We do this every single month. The topic for tonight is bucket list stories. These are those bigger, deeper, richer stories. Sometimes they can be hard and challenging and difficult. Sometimes they can be grand and milestone events. And sometimes they can be little slices of your life that feel really, really important to document. And we will get into all of that in our discussion. Briefly, I want to share one thing that we have new at Simple Scrapper, and I'm going to share my screen here. I can figure out how to do that. All right. Okay. So this is what it looks like inside of our community. Here's a poll that I did, which had a 50-50 result, which sometimes that happens. And I'm going to scroll down here to the featured section. This is my favorite thing because this is where we have everything that is new. And one of our newest things is our bucket list boot camp classroom. Some of you know that last year at Simple Scrapper, I taught a class called the Bucket List Project. And this was the kind of the big thing for 2020. We took 36 weeks to explore our bucket list stories. And we actually did this inside of Trello. It was kind of a big, grand experiment in teaching. And it was so amazing to see the stories that came out of that. But for this year, we've decided to do it a little bit differently. We now have the Bucket List Bootcamp, which is your entry point into this type of experience. So it walks you through creating a bucket list, setting a goal. We have 12 core bucket list prompts, all featuring my exclusive layouts, and then kind of 24 bonus prompts featuring layouts from our creative team and some of the bucket list stories that they have told. So in total, 36 prompts that are completely bucket list oriented, and that's on top of the more than 1,000 prompts we have in our story starters library, also here in the membership. So this is the bootcamp edition because it is not 36 weeks. It is let's get in, let's learn and experience how to tell bucket list stories with the goal of let's start with one, tell one story, pick one and do it, and then repeat the process. And I wanted to have a container for our members to be able to do that. And so I'm just going to review briefly here what you'll see on the inside. So we have the bucket list basics. This is kind of going over some of the things we talked about tonight, the difference between bucket list stories and everyday stories. And I give you a worksheet to help you kind of expand on your stories. It's called our story discovery tool, so that you can take this kind of nebulous idea and then figure out how does that translate to an actual scrapbook layout. And then of course we have our 12 different prompts. One of my favorites is the flashbulb moments prompt, where I created this timeline of some of the biggest moments in my life that I will always remember where I was when. And I selected 6 for the layout part, and then I have a list here at the bottom of additional of those kind of big dates. So this is one of my favorite ones from the whole project. So we've got those 12 layouts, and then of course all of those are combined in this big PDF. It's kind of a little mini magazine, a little mini version of our Spark magazine with the 36 different prompts, as well as our worksheets for this experience. And then of course your invitation to create your bucket list, to use Trello to track your stories if that's totally your thing. If it's not, then no big deal. And to set a goal and then share your stories with us. I really wanted to incorporate bucket list storytelling as part of our community, and this classroom is kind of that place where I can send members to say, here's where you go to get started and learn more. So if you're not yet a member, I hope you will consider it. The vast majority of everything I do is inside the membership, and that makes it easy, and that means we can do more things because I only have to talk to you about one thing. I want you to become a member and be part of our community. We have so many members here tonight, including very long time members. We've been doing this since 2011, and I love the community that's built up around this. And if you've kind of enjoyed the camaraderie experience you've had here tonight, we have this all the time inside the community. In fact, I attended a lunchtime crop today at noon. I try to come to that one every single week. That's hosted by one of our members, Carol Ann. And then Amy, who's also here tonight, hosts the hour afterwards starting at 1 o'clock. So our calendar is constantly full of times when you can set aside that time and energy to scrapbook with your peers. And it's so awesome. So I just want to talk a little bit about Bucket List Bootcamp before we continue our conversation, because I'm so proud of it and excited for this next phase of what we're doing with the Bucket List project. All right, let's go back to our questions for tonight, which are on one of these tabs here. Here we go. All right. So what are your takeaways? I want to hear what was interesting or what you learned from talking with your peers. It could be an aha moment that you had. It could be something that someone else said that you really, are thinking over. So what did you think about bucket list stories tonight?
I have to say, one of the things that really I came away with, and I really should know this, but I am not a storyteller. I have learned to tell stories because of this group, of this membership. But in generally, that's just not how I lean. And in the groups I was with many other people who are the same way. And it felt good to recognize that it's okay if you're not a storyteller. Like, I know that intrinsic, like I tell myself that, but I wasn't feeling that.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time with like the people I've met and interact with seem to be great storytellers. And I get a lot from that, but it was nice to be around people who are all about just the facts. So I appreciated that. Like, just as a reminder that I am not alone.
Well, I think sometimes it's kind of a loaded word, because if you think in a broad sense of stories, we're thinking of great works of literature, and I doubt there's anyone here who's going to write an Anna Karenina or something like that. Maybe someone I don't know you all that well, but we're just everyday people trying to capture our lives, and so I think sometimes the weight of that word itself, like you maybe you don't identify as one, but I see you as one. So I think that's something to think about too, is that uh, whether or not you're willing to wear a hat, and maybe, yeah, the nuances of, well, am I or am I not? So I don't know. I think there's some details there. Let's see. Wendy says that maybe they don't have to be on the scrapbook page. They could just be written in a journal instead. And so that's kind of a practice that can help you tell better stories, is if you do more journaling to help it feel more comfortable when you want to put words on your page. Tracy says the people who tend to share on social media seem to be good storytellers, and that sets a high bar for us, whether it should or not. Oh, that's interesting. I think there's something about social media that invites you to make it interesting. And so I think just sharing your daily photos on social media is another way of practicing. I don't know, so I think it's setting a high bar, but I can see that in some ways. Denise says, I think sticking to the facts can still be great storytelling, definitely, for sure. And Amy, I love this. We all have a story. We practice telling it in many ways. And Linda, if you don't tell your story, who will? Yes, of course. All right. What other takeaways? These are great.
I would like to share my takeaway.
Yeah, go ahead.
We in the last group, when we talked about or the last question, one of the things I mentioned was, talking about the hard stories and how that can be a little intimidating. But one of my group members, I forgot her name, but she mentioned how, it's still our story to tell. So we shouldn't fear like how someone's going to react to what we write, especially personal stories. So the fact that it's our story gives us enough, at least that's the way I understood it, for someone who has a fear of journaling and telling stories, is to just simply tell what is my view from my lens, and not really care about what everyone else is going to say about the story, even though I'm creating something to be read and to be seen, but really to focus in on what I'm feeling and what I feel is the important thing to tell in that story. So I think that's it, just kind of like a aha moment for me to kind of really think about what it is I'm putting down, because I'm more about the pretty looks than the story. And I'm really trying to shift that, because there's so much I could be telling along the way, you know?
Well, I think it kind of releases a weight of it, because that's all you have. All you have is your own perspective. Yes, we can interview our family members and we can incorporate their perspectives, but as the scrapbooker, that's what we have, is what we know. And if you can just think very plainly, okay, what is real here? What are the facts? What do we use this fact, feeling, and memory framework all the time. That's in the story discovery tool I mentioned. If you can think of one fact, one feeling, and one memory about a story, 3 sentences, that's a story. And it's a way of not only connecting the facts to you personally, but then connecting that to something else in your life. That's why also almost every story I tell connects to another memory, because everything is all connected. This is our life. And so, but I love that observation so much, because it can feel sometimes that we're, feel intimidated. We have this wall that of fear and intimidation that, oh, what if they think, and what if it's not the right thing? And, no, that's all you have is what you know. And that's there's nothing more authentic and real than that. And that's what makes it so beautiful.
In our group, I think it was Paula that talked about doing some stories around family recipes and holidays and traditions. And I didn't even think about it. I was thinking of like these big grand stories. And I'm like, well, that's a lot more simple and I think attainable. I think if you're not used to doing it. And so I really picked up on that idea, because I think those are awesome, because there is certainly a story to tell. And those are great ones, because that is the kind of family tradition stuff you want to pass down. And so I really tapped into that. And so I know that I'll be looking at something along those lines, because I think that it's, if nothing else, it's an easier way to start. And you can start, like you said, how does that spiral into a different memory and, a different situation. And so
yeah, for sure.
Even your big events on the page you just showed, I'm like, oh, that's kind of clever. Okay. So I think you just have to kind of get the wheels turning a little bit on what those stories could even look like. It's, I was envisioning it had to be like a book or something. I don't know. I overwhelmed myself right from the beginning, and I didn't need to.
Well, no, and yeah, so one of my stories was related to, I just finished watching Parks and Rec for the first time this past year. That was my pandemic watching. And I was really obsessed with Adam Scott. And I hadn't felt that obsessed with an actor since I was quite a bit younger. And I'm like, so I started thinking about who are these actors that I was obsessed with? And they all have this thing in common of like the big floppy hair, like cool guy, even though sometimes they're super nerdy, they all have a lot of hair. And so one of my bucket list stories is, oh my gosh, it's all about the hair, which is funny because my husband's bald. But and that was the, connected to my own story, but all of that was one of my bucket list stories. And it's something about my personality, and especially my youth. I had like my entire bedroom wall plastered with all the hot guys from Teen Beat magazine and all that stuff. And they were all had hair, the Jason Priestley, the Luke Perry, all that. So, it doesn't have to be big monumental things. It can be, but it can be these little slivers that are so fascinating about your personality too. And then as you were talking, one of the things that came to mind is that my invitation to you to tell bucket list stories is not to make this your sole focus of scrapbooking. It's to do this as part of your scrapbooking. And so that the more you feel like you have some of these big things told, the more weight you'll feel lifted from all those things, because we're never going to be able to catch up. But if you can say like, I have this little pocket covered, then you can have permission to have more fun and to pick up that new project and do the thing, as Neff was saying, just because it's pretty and fun and cool and you want to play with the things. If you're doing this little thing on the side for your bucket list stories, you'll feel more of that permission and less of that guilt when you do want to play, just for the sake of playing.
One of the big draw cards for me to scrapbooking is the storytelling aspect. I love getting into the story and the emotions and all that stuff. And that's a big draw card for me. But with bucket list stories, I find that not being able to tell all the details or remember all the details or even have all the details is one of the things that holds me up.
Mhm.
So we were talking about it, how you can, it's a bucket list story doesn't have to finish when you do the page. You can come back and add to it. You can stick journaling behind it or add a 6x12 page or turn it into a double page later. It doesn't have to all be done in the one session at the same time. And that was a big sort of aha for me.
Oh, for sure. Well, and you know, if you think of, you know, there's let's say capital S story, there's the big story, but your page can just be the lowercase s, the one story, that sliver of it that you want to tell. So, you know, I did a page with, you know, a column of journaling about my divorce in 2008. I was married once before for a short period of time. Lots of complication there, but that's not what the layout was about. It wasn't about, you know, the heartbreak and, you know, how about this dude. It was about releasing the shame of having been a person who got divorced. So that was the sliver of my story, was about shame and embarrassment and moving past that, not about, you know, this dude's kind of annoying. So yeah, great point, Jenny. Thank you.
We kind of discussed that in a couple of groups too, about not having all the facts and so forth. There's a story that from when I was very young that I don't really know all the facts. I know what the result was, but I don't know the facts. But we can tell that story and just even put in our journaling that we don't know all the details. Both my parents are gone now, and I don't have the opportunity to ask again, you know, what the details were. But we can put that in our story that this is what happened as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I don't know all of the facts and all of the story, but I can write that in the what I'm writing on my page. And that way, when my kids and grandkids see that, they'll know that I really didn't know the story, but I knew that that happened to me. And so I think we can go ahead and document those things and be humble enough to say, I don't know all the facts.
Yes. Well, and I think that, you know, what you want to pass down is the way that story impacted you and shaped your life. It doesn't matter why that happened or how you got there or the facts of it. And so, but it doesn't, by the fact that you're admitting that, even putting it on the page allows you to move past that barrier of incompleteness to capture the nugget that is important to pass down.
Can I ask a question? When you talk about these bucket list stories,
Mhm.
what kind of album do you put them in? Are they in your personal album? Is it a 12x12 album? Is it digital? I mean, how do you capture these bucket list stories and where do you put them?
I will share how I do it, and then I will open the floor to share how others do it as well, because this is definitely not a one size fits all thing. So everyone might find it a little bit different. This past year, I started a new album series called Stories I Told in This Year. So last year, I filled up a whole album of stories I told in 2020. And it just happened that, you know, probably 90% of those were bucket list stories. Some of them weren't. Some of them were just smaller things, layouts I made for fun. But I started a new album series because it really felt different than the other types of scrapbooking I was doing. With that, I also shifted how I was doing my everyday storytelling. I started doing more photo books and digital things for my smaller everyday, like what's going on in the news, you know, what's going to happen, you know, as my daughter's growing and changing, those littler stories, I shifted how I was telling those stories as well to accommodate and create more time because I wanted to tell more bucket list stories. Now, my experience may be completely different than anybody else's, so I'd love to hear how those of you who did some of this with me last year, where you're putting your pages.
With
Mine
bucket
just
list
go
stories,
album.
sorry, go ahead.
Mine just go my albums by year. So if it happened that year, it's just in the album with all the other stuff that happened that year.
So if your story was about like 1985, would you put it in an album for like the 80s, or would you put it for in 2021 because you scrapbooked this year?
Probably in the one about the 80s.
Okay.
That's just in my childhood album. It's a story from my childhood, goes in there. Unless it had something that made it more timely for 2020.
Mhm.
So say it was like, if it was just something about that happened in my childhood, I'd put it in the childhood album. But if it was a realization I had in 2020 because of something that happened in my childhood and in my teen years, and that's built up to this thing that in 2020, then I would put it in the 2020 album. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I think it also shows that it's ultimately a subjective decision based on the albums you currently have. And I think that's also one of the beauties of the fact that we're using more 3-ring albums these days. It's very easy to move a page from one album to another one if you decide to reorganize later.
Yeah.
What I started to say is if the layout is about me and something I want everyone to know, I have a book that I started years ago, an album of all about me. And it would go in that album because that album is what they would go to find anything they wanted to know that I had scrapbooked about myself.
I love that. I see some nods there. I think there might be some others who have kind of all about me type albums as well. And you could take this a total digital approach too. If you like to create photo books or Project Life app pages, anything you like to do, just think about, okay, what container feels comfortable to me based on the types of things I like to create. So I think the format is totally up in the air. I like to talk about the intersection between, what kind of formats, whether that's photo book pages, app pages, digital pages, hybrid pages, small pages, big pages, what formats are interesting and sound fun to make right now? And then what are the types of stories that you want to tell? Are you documenting your one little word? Are you telling bucket list stories? Are you telling everyday small daily life stories? Are you doing photo a day project? Look at those things in the intersection and then kind of mix and match. Okay, like I'm going to use this format for this type of story and this format for this type of story, and kind of see how it fits together. Does that make sense? Because we have so many options. And if you're feeling overwhelmed by the options and the things that you want to do, kind of see how you can align them to make a plan to go forward.
Terry mentioned that she's got a Library of Memories album. I'm not familiar with that term. What is that?
Okay, so this is Stacey Julian's system. She's a big time influence in our industry. She's been around for around 20 years. And she created this system of categorizing your layouts rather than feeling like you need to store them chronologically. And she also uses this to influence kind of how she chooses stories, but basically she stores her layouts in these 4 different categories, and she has subcategories as well, but it's people we love, things we do, places we go, and all about us. And so there's kind of buckets that you can put your stories in. Some people scrapbook relatively evenly across those categories. Some people don't at all, and they have 6 albums for one of the categories and 1 album for another category, depending on what's interesting to them. And there's no rule, but it's a way of kind of stepping out of the chronology. I think that was the birth of it. Because for a long time in scrapbooking, there was this pressure. And I think part of that came from just the structure of the Creative Memories albums, that you needed to scrapbook in order because we were doing front and back, and you just had to keep going because otherwise your album wouldn't work. But now that we have 3-ring albums and we can take things in and out and we have so many options, we don't necessarily have to scrapbook in order. And then it becomes your choice how then you store your layouts, whether that's in albums by year or albums by category or theme albums like a Christmas album or an All About Me album. So great questions. Lots of options. Well, we're more than happy to help you kind of clarify your own repertoire at any point too. So, all right, we have a lot of conversations in the chat that I want to make sure we get recorded here for those who are watching the replay. Okay, that one came up. Paula says, I'm a storyteller, but wanting to put all that depth in there sometimes holds me back from getting anything done. So I was inspired in the group to realize sometimes it's enough to journal because done is better than not at all. Yeah. And you can even create no photo layouts. You don't have to have any kind of match between a photo and a story. You can just make a page. It could even be pretty. That's just words to capture a story, and then you stick it in your album. Jennifer says, I don't think every story needs the same level of journaling to make it storytelling. Certainly not. It can be one line to a page or multiple pages. It's storytelling whether you have journaling or not. Let's see. Karen says, I hate this phrase, but it works in the situation. You do you. Yes, that kind of covers a lot of our conversation tonight. And that very much is aligned with our your way approach as well. Let's see. We've got a couple different comments. Terry, of course, uses her Library of Memories albums. Monica says hers go in the album the photos are a part of. She's got different album series, travel albums, and yearly albums. All right. Terry also mentions that she has very few in places we go, and that's so fascinating because that's one of my biggest categories. I like people and relationships and personalities and places, and I don't scrapbook about birthdays and going to the park or museums or anything like that, or Christmas other than December daily. All right. I think I am all caught up there. Perfect. Okay. Final thoughts. We're a little bit over time here, but this has been such a juicy discussion tonight. I appreciate all the amazing questions. Any final takeaways? No? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. I hope you come back next month for another awesome conversation. If you're not yet a member, I hope you consider it. If you have any questions or about that, feel free to send me an email, direct message, any way you can find me. I'm happy to answer. Take care and have a great week.